can't say that someone committed a crime and not explain why you're not prosecuting him. At least in the context of this. And if people don't like this, then get rid of the darn special counsel. First up, of course, is the big news out of the special counsel's office, Mr. Hur, H-U-R, who released a report essentially saying that Joe Biden committed a crime, but he's not going to be prosecuted for it because no jury is going to buy that he had the willful intent to commit the crime because he's addled, he's brain addled. His memory is not sufficient enough to warrant a prosecution. So he's seemingly incompetent and can't be prosecuted before a jury. An incredible development. In addition, the report further confirms that President Trump was right and that the Justice Department has had dual standards in how they approach Trump and how they approach previous presidents, and with all due respect to Mr. Hur, how they approach Joe Biden in the handling of these document disputes. I tell you, if the prosecution against Joe Biden can't proceed, then the prosecution against President Trump on these very same issues must be dropped. That's for sure. So the report was released this week, and you know, the funny thing is, I was traveling this week. I went down to Savannah, Georgia, wonderful city, to do a little speech down that way, and all of this is coming out while I'm traveling. So I was able to look at much of what was released, not all of it, but much of it, as I was traveling back and forth. But the document is important, and I encourage you to read the entire thing, not because I think all of it is persuasive, not that I think all of it is necessarily even honest in its analysis, but it's devastating in terms of exposing the double standard that the Justice Department took with the approach to Trump versus Biden. And when you go through each of the steps, the investigative steps, and kind of the benefit of the doubt they gave Joe Biden at every step of the way versus how they evaluated and treated President Trump in almost exactly similar circumstances, you're going to be shocked. And of course, the media misses that because they're so anti-Trump and they're more focused on the problem for Biden as a result of his obvious cognitive disability being exposed. But this is as important for Trump as it is for Biden. Excuse me. So Merrick Garland released the report, and this is how it starts off. I mean, it just does. It's whether it's legally devastating. Obviously, Biden isn't going to be prosecuted, at least under this theory or by this special counsel. But politically, it's potentially disastrous. Executive summary. We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. We would reach the same conclusion even if the Department of Justice policy did not foreclose criminal charges against the sitting president. So to take a step back, there's no law that says a sitting president can't be prosecuted for crimes. It's a policy that the Justice Department follows based on their analysis of the Constitution, which is still at issue with the issues related to President Trump, who's being prosecuted for things he did as president after he left office. So you see how that rule basically blows up, that exception that they want to make for Trump blows up the rule that no one be prosecuted while they're in office. But you can be prosecuted the day after you leave office? Well, why would you would behave quite differently, wouldn't you? And the whole purpose of protecting the president for prosecution for official acts, just as there's a protection to judges for from being prosecuted or pursued for official acts, or for members of Congress, the speech or debate clause, they're immune from prosecution in the course of their legislative duties like that. Of course, there has to be a similar rule for the president. The constitutional structure requires it. So, of course, I'm already getting distracted because everything's outrageous, right? Because, you know, there's the dishonesty here just bleeds through in terms of how all of this has been applied and how much Trump has been abused. Our investigators uncovered evidence that President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. These materials included, 1, marked classified documents about military and foreign policy in Afghanistan, and 2, notebooks containing Mr. Biden's handwritten entries about issues of national security and foreign policy implicating sensitive intelligence sources and methods. FBI agents recovered these materials from the garage, offices, and basement den in Mr. Biden's Wilmington, Delaware home. So there you have it. There's the garage. Makes me think that I get worried my garage is too messy, and then I see Joe Biden's garage, and I'm thinking, well, it's not all that bad. But that circled box is where he's kept the classified information. Now, again, to take a step further back, Judicial Watch had litigated this very issue against who? Bill Clinton, or specifically the National Archives. Bill Clinton had talked to an author who recorded him while he was President of the United States. And that author recorded him talking to members of Congress and foreign leaders, at least one foreign leader. And when the president communicates with a foreign leader, those communications generally are necessarily classified. So we were talking about potentially, and the assumption was in the case, classified information. And this was many years ago. It's about 10, 12 years ago now. And we said, well, aren't these presidential records, right? We were taking the Biden administration's position with respect to Trump. And the Justice Department at the time came back at us and said no. The archives came back at us and said no. And the court, a left-wing judge, agreed and said essentially the president has unreviewable authority to designate records as personal or classified. And there's no second guessing it. And if he wants to take documents with him, he can. And there's no way to get them back because once he has them, they're his. Indeed, in the hearing related to our case, the Justice Department told the court at the time that records that he has, because we were talking about classified records, they said, well, we just presume they're personal if he has them. And in this case, they confirmed Joe Biden thought that same way in the handling of records from his time as Vice President of the United States. He wanted to keep these records for his own use, and he specifically wanted them, at least the case of the Afghanistan documents, because he didn't like the Afghanistan policy of Obama and Obama's predecessors, and he thought he would be vindicated by history, and he wanted to keep those records. And he thought he had a right to them, that they were his records. And says, the special prosecutor, although he pretended to disagree with him on the law, said that's a credible defense. And because it's a credible defense, it might be a powerful enough defense to get him off on a jury, and that's one of the reasons they didn't prosecute him. That same very analysis applies to Trump, as we've highlighted. As we've been punished for highlighting. Remember, because we've been talking about this issue, the Justice Department and Jack Smith targeted me personally with a subpoena and Judicial Watch and forced me to come in and testify to a grand jury for 4 hours where I argued with them about this very issue. And what's interesting in this piece of in this report is that there's even another case that's even more on point that supports not only President Biden's position, blows out of the water the attack on Trump, and it doubly confirms what we found in the Clinton records case, or what we lost in the Clinton records case. It was the Reagan diaries. Reagan kept a diary day to day of his activities almost in the White House. And that included classified information. And this is what they say about that. The clearest example is President Reagan, who left the White House in 1989 with 8 years' worth of handwritten diaries, which he appears to have kept at his California home, even though they contained top-secret information. During criminal litigation involving a former Reagan administration official in 1989 and 90, the Department of Justice stated in public court filings that the currently classified diaries were Mr. Reagan's personal records. Yet we know of no steps the department or other agencies took to investigate Mr. Reagan for mishandling classified information or to retrieve or secure his diaries. Most jurors will likely find evidence of this precedent and Mr. Biden's claimed reliance on it, which we expect would be admitted at trial, to be compelling evidence that Mr. Biden did not act willfully. How on earth does that not apply to Trump too? Now they're pretending there's a distinction, by the way, between Biden and Trump, and there isn't. I've read the report. There's nothing persuasive. It's all just mere allegations that easily could be applied to Biden as it is to Trump. Now so this is dramatic evidence on behalf of President Trump. I mean, Mr. Hur is now, as far as I'm concerned, the number one defense witness for President Trump in that documents trial down in Miami that Jack Smith is pursuing against Trump. I mean, how is this not relevant? I mean, the fact that they're not prosecuting Biden on the same set of facts while they're prosecuting Trump, I mean, to me, that's the epitome of selective prosecution and should result in the case being thrown out. But it gets worse, because all that's helpful to Trump, right? But even though Biden is supposedly exonerated here, however dishonestly, he's exonerated in a way that's devastating to him in terms of his ability potentially to remain in office. Forget about getting elected or not. There are serious questions about whether he should resign because of the information in this report. In addition to him being accused quite directly of a crime, we're told that one of the reasons he's not going to be prosecuted, in addition to these plausible defenses he has based on constitutional law and precedent and practice and DOJ's prior position, the same things that we've been talking for a year or two about Trump, they say his memory is awful. And no one's going to believe he had the mental state of willfulness necessary to warrant a prosecution. It first comes up here. This is the big phrase. In addition, Mr. Biden's memory, this is page 5, guys. You're down a little bit too further. We're going to get to that part later. In addition, Mr. Biden's memory was significantly limited, both during his recorded interviews with the ghostwriter. He had talked to a ghostwriter for his book in 2017, and in his interview with our office in 2023. And his cooperation with our investigation, including by reporting to the government that the Afghanistan documents were in his Delaware garage, will likely convince some jurors that he made an innocent mistake rather than acting willfully, that is, with intent to break the law as the statute requires. His memory is significantly limited. And then later, we have also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden will likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Based on direct interactions with and observance of him, he is someone for whom many jurors will want to identify reasonable doubt. It will be difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a former president well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires a mental state of willfulness. So the honesty here is he's a very sympathetic defendant because he has evidence of dementia or cognitive decline associated with late age. The dishonesty is saying a jury will never convict him. What they mean is a Democrat jury in D.C. will never convict him. I mean, you could play that game for any candidate, any potential defendant. So to me, it's not sufficient to keep him out of court. But they had to have an explanation, right? Because they say he committed a crime here. There's evidence he committed a crime. Why aren't we prosecuting him? And a key reason they're not prosecuting him is because of his terrible failures of memory. And it's not just that. I mean, listen to the devastating analysis of it later here. This is on page 207 of the report. We'll have a link below for the report if you want to look at it. Mr. Biden's memory also appeared to have significant limitations, both at the time he spoke to Swanitsa, I don't know how to pronounce his name, that's the ghostwriter book author, as evidenced by their recorded conversations, and today, as evidenced by his recorded interview with our office. I want the transcript, right? I want the video. If there's a video, was there a recordation made of this? Why isn't it public yet? Mr. Biden's recorded conversation with Zonitzer from 2017 are often painfully slow, with Mr. Biden struggling to remember events and straining at times to read and relay his own notebook entries. In this interview with our office, Mr. Biden's memory was worse. He did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview, when his term ended. If it was 2013, when did I stop being vice president? They quote him as saying. He did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died. And his memory appeared hazy when describing the Afghanistan debate that was once so important to him. Among other things, he mistakenly said he had a real difference of opinion with General Carl Eikenberry, when in fact Eikenberry was an ally who Mr. Biden cited approvingly in his Thanksgiving memo to President Obama. And that's a big memo he wrote opposing their strategy in Afghanistan. In a case where the government must prove that Biden knew he had possession of the classified Afghanistan documents after the vice presidency and chose to keep those documents knowing he was violating the law, we expect that at trial his attorneys would emphasize these limitations in his recall. So it wasn't so much they're trying to ding him for having a poor memory. They're highlighting that obvious evidence of memory fails would make it impossible for them to get a conviction. Now, as I said, I disagree, but that's the explanation they have. And so everyone on the left is now complaining, saying that this special counsel is a MAGA Republican, when in fact he's a left-wing Republican by all accounts. And he's an appointee of Merrick Garland. I mean, my question is, if Merrick Garland thinks that Joe Biden's memory is fine, then he should reject the conclusions of the special counsel and prosecute Joe Biden. If Joe Biden thinks his memory is fine, he should tell his attorney general to say, ignore what he says, you make an independent evaluation and ignore his comments on my memory and just call it as you see it. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't, quote, exonerate Biden without admitting he's being protected because of the fact he can't function. And then, to make matters worse, let me go through the rest of the report here. Let me make sure I'm going to cover something. Third, as discussed to some extent above, this is the other reason they don't want to prosecute him. Biden will likely present himself to the jury, as he did during his interview with our office, as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. While he is and must be accountable for his actions, he is, after all, the President of the United States. Based on our direct conversations with him, Biden is someone for whom many jurors will want to search for a reasonable doubt. Again, as I say, what they need to be saying is D.C. jurors who are sympathetic. I mean, the number of Republicans in the D.C. jury pool is immaterial. They're not going to show up in the jury pool in any great extent. It would be difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a former president who will be at least well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires a mental state of willfulness. So you can see they declined to recommend prosecution. So completely devastating to Biden, completely exonerating to Trump, and a complete indictment of the way the Justice Department has approached Trump. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But let's talk about the political blowback. So I remember, and I don't remember the congressman, I think it happened, it's not apocryphal. There was a congressman who was named the stupidest member of Congress. And to push back on it, he held a press conference denying he was stupid, which, as many people correctly saw, was further evidence that he was indeed stupid. Now, Joe Biden is accused here of being mentally unwell in terms of having just an awful memory that would protect him from federal prosecution, make him incompetent, practically speaking, for trial. Now, they didn't go that far saying he would be incompetent and be found incompetent, but they thought his memory was so awful that no jury would convict him for crimes that required willfulness. Then he reacted and held this awful press conference last night. I think we have a clip of his initial reaction to these questions about his memory.
President Biden, something the special counsel said in his report is that one of the reasons you were not charged is because, in his description, you are a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
I'm well-meaning, and I'm an elderly man, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I put this country back on its feet. I don't need his recommendation. It's totally
How bad is your memory, and can you continue as president?
My memory is so bad, I let you speak. That's
Do you
my
feel your memory has gotten worse, Mr.
No, look,
President?
my memory is not good. My memory is fine.
And then later, he was asked a question or made a statement related to the Middle East. He's decided one of the other scandals this week is he's become completely anti-Israel on behalf of the terrorist supporters in the base of his party, or what he considers to be the base of his voters, that are angry that he's daring to support Israel even moderately. Now he's just completely viciously anti-Israel. But this is how he began talking about the issue.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in the Gaza Strip has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. I talked to Bibi to open the gate on the Israeli side. I've been pushing really hard, really hard.
So there you have the president, literally minutes after he said he's got a great memory, confused the president of Mexico with the president of Egypt. And it happens all the time, but it happened at exactly the wrong time during this press conference. And as a result, there's been a firestorm, even among Democrats. And he repeatedly said false things about the special counsel report and what Trump had done. And that you can look up on your own. But my point is that he was trying to reassure the American people he's on top of things, and he raised questions about whether he should be removed from office involuntarily through the 25th Amendment, or whether he should resign, or whether Democrats, I'm sure now, are talking more brightly and directly about replacing him on the ballot. And, the politics of it, I guess you can't, they kind of intersect with the good government part of the analysis I'm trying to bring to bear here. But when you have a Justice Department special counsel operating on behalf of Merrick Garland conclude his memory warrants him being protected from criminal prosecution, his memory problems, well, why wouldn't the body politic and government institutions wonder whether he can continue to function at all as President of the United States? So it's a crisis now. It's a crisis for Joe Biden, and it's a crisis for America. I mean, I don't cackle about Joe Biden looking awful on the stage last night, it's troubling because our whole country's national security relies in large measure on the strength and competence as projected by the President of the United States. And when the President is weak and ill or seemingly cognitively challenged, and confirmed to be cognitively challenged in a Justice Department report that's protecting him for prosecution, how is it that adversaries like Putin, Chairman Xi, or even our friends, because as you know, in the international sphere, sometimes your friends are always trying to get one up you. What must they be thinking? And of course, they've probably been thinking this for years. But now it's all out in the open, and our country is being destabilized as a result of these questions, not only about Biden's criminality, but his basic ability to do the job. And this confirms the vicious, nasty, in my view, criminal abuse of power targeting Trump. So, as I said, they had the Clinton sock drawer case. They had the example of the Reagan case, where the presumption was by the Justice Department and the National Archives that records the president had after he leaves office, which also applied to the vice president, because my view is Biden was right on documents he had as vice president. He did have a right to keep them. I mean, that was the policy and practice of the Justice Department. That was their analysis. It's what the law says. It's what a key court has decided. It's the way Reagan was treated. It was the way Clinton was treated. Biden was right. So was Trump. That's the point. They're treating him differently. Now, the problem that Biden has, which I think they tend to gloss over here, is that he had classified records from his days as senator. Now, those protections and prerogatives the president has to keep classified information with him after they leave office, it doesn't apply to Joe Biden, the senator. And that's where he faces a legal liability, where there is no legitimate defense. So what they did to Trump, this is what happened. In 2021, they came in and lied to him, and they said to him and his attorneys and his personal representatives, you have documents from when you were president, and they're ours. You're not allowed to have them. You got to turn them back over to the National Archives. And they finally turned over 15 boxes, and they didn't have to turn them over because they had no right to ask for them legally. I guess they could ask, anyone can ask anything, right? But they lied when they said they weren't his. And they needed to turn them over. They were his. And they told him otherwise. And they used that whole dispute to concoct a raid on his home and a prosecution. They lied to Trump about the nature of the records he had. They said they weren't his, and they knew better. And this is why we got so upset once it became public, because we had been involved in the Clinton case. We knew what they were telling Trump and the position they were taking was at odds with prior DOJ policy on records in the possession of a former president. So when Biden says, these were mine and I didn't want to turn them over, whether they were classified or not because they're mine, he was right. But of course, the Justice Department changed the rules, and it's led to this crisis for Biden, because then it gave the Justice Department, they were forced into having to investigate Biden, even though the whole thing was based on a big falsehood that the records that a president or vice president had after he left office were still the custody or still government records, and they weren't, or presidential records. They were their personal records. So this ought to be the end, in my view, of the Trump prosecution in Florida. I heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, so maybe I shouldn't say that. This is what I think Trump should do. He should demand his records back, an apology, and money for the damages he suffered for the violations of his civil liberties. That's what he should do. Now, legally, what he should do to get that, I guess, is another matter. In this case, he can, I guess, maybe ask for a motion to dismiss based on selective prosecution. I mean, this is Exhibit A, this document, 300 and whatever pages. This is Exhibit A for the Trump defense. If not Biden, then why Trump? If not Biden, then why Trump? Really outrageous. So, I could go on and on about it, but I tell you, this is further evidence that the Justice Department has been turned into a weapon against President Trump. It's further evidence that the Justice Department and the FBI are completely political. Now, I know the left is complaining that this is like the Comey moment, right? That Hur went beyond what he was allowed to do by talking about this, and this is the Comey moment they're referencing.
From the group of 30,000 emails, 110 emails have been determined by the owning agency to contain classified information. 8 of those chains contained information that was top secret. Although there is evidence of potential violations of the statutes regarding the handling of classified information, our judgment is that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case. We are expressing to justice our view that no charges are appropriate in this case.
And of course, he went on to just attack Hillary Clinton, right? Saying how derelict in terms of her responsibilities she was in terms of the handling classified information. And they're saying, well, this is, and what the left is now saying, and Biden's defenders, is that's what Hur did. Something inappropriate by going beyond what he needed to say. And the difference is Comey didn't need to attack Hillary there. And I don't think he should have, really. And people say, Tom Fitton, you're so anti-Hillary. I think Hillary was right in criticizing Comey for the way he handled that. He had no business making comments about her conduct. But Hur had no choice in some ways because of the nature of his job. He was special counsel, and he had to explain to the public why he wasn't bringing charges. As I said earlier, you can't say that someone committed a crime and not explain why you're not prosecuting him. At least in the context of this. And if people don't like this, then get rid of the darn special counsels. I don't know about you, but the Justice Department should not be running our election system and, putting thumbs up or thumbs down on presidential candidates. And in this case, and with the case of Trump, investigating non-crimes and then using said investigation. In the case of Trump, they're trying to put him in jail for non-crimes. And for poor Joe, I know a lot of you are going to say, don't say poor Joe. But for poor Joe, he gets investigated for non-crimes, at least with respect to the vice presidential records. And he gets slammed indirectly because of this memory issue. But, this is the mess the left made. The Justice Department changed the rules, and so now Joe Biden got caught up in their own games that they were playing against Trump. The dog reared back and bit the handler, which is the Biden regime. Now, you have to remember, at the time they were harassing Trump, they were hiding all this Biden information, the fact he had these documents. And once it became public, after months and months and months, they had no choice to appoint a special counsel for Biden because they already had been targeting and harassing Trump for a year plus. So they're really devastating evidence not only of Justice Department and an FBI double standards, but dishonesty by many agencies of government in the targeting of Trump. And then you've got the current crisis of Biden's questions about his cognitive abilities. What a week. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.